All right, friends, welcome to this episode of the Sink and Swim podcast. I'm really, truly over the moon to be sitting today with Audrey Burke, who we go way back, all the way to college. In fact, we just talked about, before we came on, how we probably haven't talked to each other in 20 years, which tells you how long ago I graduated from college. Audrey is one of those rare humans who can help you hear the quiet parts of your body without making you reach too hard to hear them, makes it softer for you. She works at the intersection of somatic work, nervous system care, and what we could maybe call feminine wisdom, the kind that both softens you and gives you a spine, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. I love your story, Audrey, because there's so much to your story, but you were a mover. You've been a mover in some way for much of your life. And you told me this not that long ago, which was like you were moving your body, but you weren't in your body. So we'll dig into that part of the story, which I think is so common for so many of us who are movers or athletes or in healthcare or in healing professions, is we so focus on the body and the movement, but we're not necessarily embodied. And then you bridged into such beautiful work that you do now involving somatic experiencing and pelvic bowl work and creativity. And I also love that you are such an advocate for how it feels to exist as a highly sensitive and intuitive person in the world for both yourself and your clients. And you serve so many wonderful people who might identify that way. And how that led you into a journey of learning what healthy aggression and boundaries actually mean for you. And we'll also dig into how to build a life that doesn't follow the default script, which I love. I just love. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Tell us all about you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's really a joy to reconnect with you and see everything that you're doing in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a brief intro about me. So, my license is as a massage therapist. So I always like to make it clear that that's my scope of practice. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a medical professional. But in addition to studying massage therapy, I've also done the 3-year Somatic Experiencing training, which is the work of Peter Levine. That's all about working through the body and the nervous system to help heal trauma. So, I'm trained in polyvagal theory, trained in the nervous system and trauma completion. And then in addition to that, I've deepened my studies in somatic work through studying developmental trauma. My main teacher in that area has been Stephen Terrell, who's the author of a book called Nurturing Resilience. And he teaches about how to use touch to help heal and alleviate the symptoms of developmental trauma. So that includes a lot of touch work, a lot of co-regulation through touch, and I'll continue deepening my studies in all of these things, but I'm a big advocate for using touch to help heal trauma. I can work with or without touch. A lot of people come to me because they are already doing lots of things and feel like there's something still missing that probably has to do with the nervous system, and that touch could really be helpful. They might also be people who have wounds that involve touch and they want to heal those wounds. So that's really what differentiates working with me from a somatic experiencing practitioner who's a therapist, is that I use a lot of touch, which most therapists do not touch people.
You're right.
So
Not physically, at least,
Yeah, exactly.
This is so interesting, coming from a physical therapy background of my own, rife with manual therapy, i.e. touch. First of all, I just love the word touch, different than manual therapy or massage even, because to me, those bring their own definitions and belief systems and doctrine and things. But touch is it's so gentle, so gentle of a word. And it can mean all of those things, obviously. It's almost like the umbrella over the words. But in my later years of being in practice, which I no longer am, I felt that touch was a conversation with the nervous system. It wasn't necessarily me doing something with that person. I love how you brought in that as a co-regulatory modality, so to speak. And when I look back on it, I was programmed to believe one thing about what touch meant and what I was doing, whether I was mobilizing or manipulating or healing someone with my hands. And now I'm like, I think I always intuitively knew it wasn't that. And it was, that conversation. It's like either opening up a channel for that person with themselves that's something they can't access, or between some, beautiful gift you have that you can offer to help them. I like how you said, what did you say? Completion of trauma.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. To let the whole pattern roll through. Yeah. And it is so different from psychotherapy because I feel like that element of human experience is very underrated. Touch.
Yeah, and not all therapists work this way. There are a lot of somatic and trauma-informed therapists, but a lot of people, their idea of therapy is I'm going to go in and talk about all of my problems. I'm going to
Yeah.
talk about all the things that are stressful in my life, which is not always that kind to the nervous system. Sometimes you leave therapy like feeling more stressed out because you just talked about all the things that are hard to deal with in your life. And so this work that I do can kind of flip therapy on its head a little bit, where we're like, instead of talking about all the stressful things, let's regulate your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And then from
Yeah.
there, a lot of times, even our beliefs, our experience of the world, our experience of ourself can shift from the bottom up versus having to process it cognitively.
Yeah, I've heard that top down versus bottom up. I feel like there's room at the table for both. And you're right that so many people might be missing that bottom up experience or as I've noted, so having gone from healthcare through health coaching and now to more like somatic spiritual soul coaching that I do, the bottom up approach might be very medical or clinical in nature, which might be needed. Or it might be a misfire where those body symptoms we're looking to, I'm going to come back to the word regulate, but we're looking to regulate them or quiet them or calm them or heal them or fix them or diagnose them or treat them. And, you take a supplement for it or you do some type of medication, whatever it is, change your diet, something like that, all good things. But sometimes it's not the exact use of bottom up that can be helpful for the person. So I love that you mentioned that. Now, circling back to the word regulation
Mm-hmm.
and also somatics. So you gave me that definition. Before we came on, we were talking about how somatics is having its moment. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think that maybe it's important to even define out what we mean or what you mean by
Mm-hmm.
regulation and what we're actually talking about here. And I think we'll give some examples too, like, and demonstrate this versus just talk about it. So even listeners could feel it or at least see us doing it or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to talk about all of this. Yeah. I'll first start with my definition of regulation, which is that, and there's a lot of misconceptions about this. A lot of times when people hear the word regulated, they think of like a Zen monk sitting in lotus pose, like not being flustered by anything. My definition of regulation is being able to respond to each moment in a way that's appropriate to what's actually happening in that moment. And so we actually do want our nervous system to be able to mobilize and fight or flight or like get up out of bed and go to work in the morning. Like we want our system to be able to mobilize when we need to mobilize, but we don't want to get stuck up there. We want our nervous system to be flexible so that we can settle back down once a threat is gone, when we need to sleep, when we need to eat and digest our food. And so that's my definition of regulation, is like responding to each moment according to what's actually happening in that moment. And, these fight and flight responses, a lot of times they get a bad rap, but we actually need them. We just don't want to get stuck in them. We want to be able to use them in that moment and then have our system settle once the threat is passed.
That makes perfect sense. And I think they definitely get a bad rap. I mean, there's so much shaming, like, oh, you're in a fight or flight response and you need to just calm down. I'm thinking of the Taylor Swift song, I'm such a Swiftie, you need to calm down. And it's the best song ever. And that's not what it's about. But it's, I love how you said the monk and lotus pose. I joke with my clients all the time. Yeah, if you want to go be a monk on a mountaintop, fine. But that's not really what we're doing here. And there's not that that's a bad thing. I think that the both and the letting yourself mobilize and be in that, what is that, sine wave of
Mm-hmm.
the way the nervous system works is so crucial. And this missing piece, I think, to regulation culture, we'll say.
Yeah, and I'm actually having to do a lot of my own unlearning and help my clients to not replicate the medical model with nervous system regulation, like, oh, this is what healthy looks like, and if you don't match that, there's something wrong with you. When there's so many communities that are marginalized, that's like, there's really good reasons for your nervous system to not be calm all the time, considering, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, based on like gender, religion, all of these things, like there's very good reasons for our nervous systems to responding to what's happening around us.
I so love that you said that. Gosh, we could go down so many rabbit holes with all of that. We're going to need to do another episode. I'm already mapping it out in my head. But what's really interesting, I host a book club, and we were reading a book it was a real book. It was the book Educated. I don't know if you've read that book. By Tara Westover. It's a real story. It's a memoir, and there was quite a bit of trauma that was happening in the story via her family. And part of our discussion was about how could someone be in such a state where they're inflicting trauma on someone else? Not that I'm saying it's okay, but there was this discussion of compassion around it. And what was interesting was, I can't remember who said it, but I was kind of backing what they said. I was like, but if you think about it, there's so much context to their upbringing, to their culture, to their I think there were religious beliefs involved. There's race, there's class issues that were there. Gender, for sure. There was definitely like a gender issue going on. And it's like you can't talk about regulation without talking about all of the intersections of society, because it's easy in many ways to kind of get stuck in your little corner of the world of, I identify as a white cisgendered woman, right?
Mm.
And if I'm not hearing what else is going on, I'm going to lose context and therefore the ability to feel compassion for someone else, but also to co-regulate with them, and be able to coexist
Mhm,
in a way
mhm.
that's helpful and friendly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so helpful to reframe this, because a lot of times when people are struggling with regulation, they go to the thought of like, there's something wrong with me, rather than like, there's actually a book like what happened to you, like what happened to me, and like what is the water I am swimming in. It's not all just my personal
Yeah.
responsibility.
I once had a mentor who harped on everything is your personal responsibility, and it's never the environment and it's never the context. Everything is because of your childhood upbringing, and that's it. I've done a lot of unlearning from that. And there's this deep intuitive exhale that happens when you can say, you know what? It's not just me, it's the system, or it's not just me,
Hmm.
it's the
Hmm.
culture. And that's
Hmm.
not to say that you're abdicating the parts that you can hold and work on and whatnot. It's like you can't regulate in a system that isn't designed to support you. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this term from the developmental trauma world called locus of control. And you can
Mhm.
either have like an extreme internal locus of control, which is like, I'm responsible for everything that happens in my world. And then there's external locus of control, which is like, things are just happening to me. More of that, like, yeah, things are just happening to me.
Mhm.
It's fate, it's destiny, it's just bad luck. And ultimately, we want a healthy balance between internal and external locus control,
Right.
and be able to sense like what is in my control and what's out of my control. And a lot of times when people have developmental trauma, they get stuck in one of those extreme places where they either feel like everything's just happening to me, or this is all my fault, and like I'm in total control of all of this.
Yeah, a really good balance between that internal external locus of control. I majored in developmental psychology.
Well, I did not know that.
So you saying all that, I'm like, oh, that's bringing back some
Hmm.
words, like vocabulary.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I had a thought and it left me. This is what happens, right? I remember you said something about, oh, it's fate and that happens. That's like too much external locus. But what's really interesting about that particular external locus is it's kind of spiritualized, and it's dressed
Hmm.
up in this sort of righteous spiritual clothing, which, I mean, it makes the person even more powerless,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And like can really alter how their system is functioning.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there can be that kind of spiritual bypassing of like, oh, this is just my soul's plan, or this person's my twin flame, or it's just meant to be, like all that.
So
Yeah.
interesting.
I don't feel like I answered your question of like, what is somatic? But somatic basically just means of the body. So I'm trained in somatic experiencing, which is like experiencing your body in the present moment. And in somatic experiencing work, we do that by tracking sensations in the body. We might track images that are coming up. Sometimes we're tracking gestures, like what's the body doing? Is it, making fists? Do we see some kind of tension somewhere? Is there an impulse to move in some way? We'll also track emotions that come up, and not just naming the emotion, but actually feeling it in the body. And then we do talk about meaning, but that's more of the cognitive stuff. So because it's somatic work, we try to stay more in those first four channels, the SIBA. But yeah, somatic, the word is definitely having a moment right now. I see a lot of therapists sometimes say they're somatic therapists, and I'm like, it doesn't really look like you've done any somatic training. Like, why are you calling yourself a somatic therapist? I've even heard of like, oh, this is somatic yoga. And maybe they are actually integrating some more tracking of body sensations in that type of yoga, or maybe they're just using it for marketing. I don't know. I like see on YouTube like, oh, this is a somatic workout. And in some ways, like all yoga and all working out is somatic because you're using your body. But with somatic experiencing, we are not just moving the body, but really noticing what's happening in our system. What sensations are we noticing? Do we feel tension? Do we feel ease? There's a few different ways we can also track our somatic experience. We have like interoception, which is our ability to sense what's happening inside our body. There's exteroception, which is how we're relating to things that are outside our body. And then there's also proprioception, which is like how are we sensing our bodies moving through space. So we're touching in on all of those. But I do think it's important, especially if you want to work with a somatic practitioner who specializes in trauma, to really ask about their training, like which training program did you do? Do you specialize in working with trauma? And if you have a specific kind of trauma, you can be like, have you worked with someone who has medical trauma, or, whatever kind of trauma you have? Because there is a lot of people who are just throwing the word around who might not have extensive training.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've even heard in the healthcare and physical therapy world, like I told my client to shake when they were tense. So we were doing somatic work. And I'm like, not wrong, and again, I'm not an authority on this. I haven't gone through the whole training, but I also know what it's not, you know what I mean? I'm like, I've gone through enough of my own personal work and some little micro trainings here and there to know the limits and to know when you are kind of tossing the word around or using it as marketing, or I don't, you know what I mean? Like, so I love that you spoke to that. And I don't know that there's necessarily, and it's certainly not wrong to teach your client to shake if that seems like an appropriate tool,
Well, and we actually don't do a lot of shaking in somatic experiencing. When we're tracking impulse, we're trying to track what's happening from the inside versus like forcefully shaking your body.
Right.
Sometimes we'll like gently move joints, but usually when we do movement, it's pretty slow.
Yeah.
And then we'll pause to see what we're feeling. But if there's any kind of shaking that happens, we want it to initiate from the inside versus like,
let me make it happen.
yeah, let me make it happen. Yeah.
Well, I think that comes back to that sort of conversation about regulation. And it's not that like standing up and shaking doesn't help you find a different state of being, Again, it's like can be a really great form of discharge when you feel like you can't figure out how to do, you know what I mean? Like it does have to be a little more cognitive. But I think that like that might be the part where, just as with any other healing modality, it's like if you don't have the full context, you might not be hurting someone, but you also might not be helping them. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason we slow it down so much in SE is because we are looking for that completion. And sometimes if you're moving too fast or too much, the motor parts of your brain don't necessarily get that sense of completion. And so when we can really slow it down and feel it, often that will help whatever needs to be completed to settle, where sometimes maybe the shaking feels good. And if people like shaking, feel free, but it might not necessarily be the best for resolving trauma for.
That makes perfect sense. Well, it's kind of like, okay, here's your supplement you need to swallow. For your cortisol is imbalanced, and so take some ashwagandha, nothing against ashwagandha. But it's like, if we're not looking at what the body needs and what the system needs, we'll just use that for the cortisol to balance. And you're just taking this external thing every day that might not actually help you complete the cycle of why it's off in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah. And then you can see people who get a little bit addicted to having a certain amount of catharsis. It's like their nervous system has to get activated to a higher level, and then they have to like let it out in this big way. And that's the only way they're able to experience release, is if I let it build real high and then this release. And you can even see that in relationships sometimes, where they have to like get into this big fight before they can have this collective deactivation or downregulation together. And so with SC, we're also trying to experience those cycles, that sine wave you were talking about, and even smaller waves too. Like I can experience a little activation and then settle. I don't have to wait for it to build to this like extreme level before settling can happen.
Yeah. I think that's a really common pattern with a lot of my clients, or who are mostly all women, healers, helpers, service providers of some way, is they are very good at allowing it to come back down only when it's gotten big.
Mm-hmm.
So many things we could unpack with that. But I think that just you naming it that way, even with the physical visual of like, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then we're going to come down. Like at some point, it's going to come down, whether we decide or our body decides for us. And I mean, I feel like my cancer story is such a story of that. It's just like the short version being, it got so big inside my chest that I had no choice but to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I really relate to that story as well. I mean, it's not the same as your story, but I had a health crisis about, I guess, 11 years ago. And that was what it took for me to like finally start paying attention to what my body was saying. I was having all these physical health symptoms, and that's what forced me to slow down. And that's what forced me to work with a somatic experiencing practitioner myself. And what's so helpful about embodiment work and becoming more aware of your internal sensations is we can start to catch the first cue that something feels off, or the first cue that something's overwhelming, so that we can do something about it before it's reached that like crisis level.
Yeah. The crest of the wave, before it's going to crash
Exactly.
down. Yeah, I so relate to that. I think that one of the most beautiful things, having worked with an SCD practitioner too, that I've learned is catching it early. It's not that we're going to avoid it. It's like, wait, that's the sign. And then you even find a sign before that. And then it's just like backing out of the alleyway before you're down the dead end street kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would love to hear from you at some point during our chat. And if now is a good time, great. If it's not, maybe later. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your experience with somatic experiencing, kind of what that shifted for you, or even how you're using somatics in your coaching practice now.
Yeah, let's do it. We don't have necessarily rhymes and reasons here. So I've experienced, in coming out of a pretty traumatic female relationship breakup for me, I got clued in with someone who's a coach who used a lot of somatic work in their work. And that was kind of my first exposure to somatics, energy work. Again, the less tangible, although very tangible in your body type of stuff. And also got hooked up with an SE practitioner, like certified, and was like, this is so fascinating, because I had intuitively done a lot of this work with clients, done it with myself, just kind of got there, like my body was like, hey, I think this needs to happen. And so I would just listen. And I'd been doing that for about 11 years, before cancer, during cancer, after. But occasionally my ship would kind of get swayed into, again, sort of that. I was being mentored and led by someone, as I told you, who had some maybe some false beliefs that they were teaching, and then also some false pretenses, and also stuff that actually brought you out of your body. But it sounded really good on paper because it was very spiritual sounding. So
Hmm.
now I'm very clued into those types of things, obviously, and I pick up on those little pre-cues personally. So as the client, I've been on the receiving end. As the practitioner, as I look back, I haven't done a full certification because I'm not quite sure yet if that is what I need to do. But I've done several little mini one-off trainings. I've also done some IFS training and somatic IFS training, and love the interplay between the two. I feel like they are this beautiful way of doing things. And when I was coaching teens and working with kids, I didn't know this, but I very organically was teaching them parts work because it was a way for kids to really relate to what they were experiencing. And there was a lot of body work with it because I was doing health and body type coaching.
Hmm.
And even in physical therapy, I always found in working with kids and teens, because they're young, number one, they don't have filters. And so they don't hide what they're feeling and experiencing and thinking. Very honest. Number two, their bodies don't hide. They haven't quite learned to lock it down. And so there was a lot of even just observing clients where I knew when to bring in a different approach that wasn't, here, do these exercises, or I'm laying my hands on you, or to use touch. With kids, using touch to me was such a beautiful thing, potentially, but also very delicate, because I was so clear on making sure I received consent, like full chested, full bodied consent from a child, which they can't necessarily give legally, but I was just so delicate with it. And so I feel like all of that combined gave me this experience set that I carried forth into my coaching work, where I'm reading people, like reading cues, just watching, listening to tones of voice, looking at even like muscles in the neck, like when someone's talking, just things that you might not pick up on. And I think a lot of that came from working with kids.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I also think anyone who has sensitivity of any kind is usually pretty naturally gifted at kind of reading people's body cues and picking
Yeah.
up on their energy.
Yeah. Yeah. So in my current coaching work, a lot of the work is, I would say, more somatic parts work. Like it's a little more IFS oriented. For most of my clients are healthcare providers, women in healthcare, and it's a little more cognitive approach. Not much, it's very embodied, but for some reason it gives them a little bit more like a visual in a way that their brains can wrap their head around, that make it very approachable. And then oftentimes once they've established a relationship with parts, then a little bit more embodiment, a little bit more like really cluing them into body cues and sensations, and that kind of stuff can come in. But it's just so interesting that I say this all the time, all these women who help other people be in their bodies, they're not in theirs. And it can be a really delicate thing to actually invite people in to their own bodies, because we were honestly trained and programmed to get out of our bodies.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I agree with you that the parts work is a really great way to um, listen to the body rather than trying to fix it. Like that's so much of the
Yes.
IFS approach. I haven't studied IFS, but I've received it and read the books. But that approach of we're befriending these parts instead of trying to fix them.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of my clients respond really well when I bring up the movie Inside Out, because it was based on IFS theory. And they're like, oh, I love that movie. It makes so much sense. And I was like, okay, well, you've got an inner joy and an inner sadness and all of that. And so it brings a little bit of emotional intelligence and vocabulary first through, I think, the emotional realm is sort of the first layer. And then when we can actually maybe not even put a name on the sensation and just be with it and not label it, and see if it's telling any stories or giving, like you said, images or something like that,
Hmm.
um, that usually uncovers some really beautiful stuff. Now, I don't really work with people who are recovering from trauma. That's definitely a line I draw. It's definitely more of coaching. Who are you becoming? Like
Mm-hmm.
uncovering those parts of the soul. That's not to say that sometimes trauma things don't come up, but a lot of my clients are also working with a practitioner or therapist or something like that that's
Mm-hmm.
in tandem. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for asking.
Oh, yeah, I love nerding out about this stuff.
Me
So
too.
I was curious to hear about your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, I keep putting the SE training on my radar, but as you know, it's extensive and it's a big commitment and it's expensive, but it's worth it. And I wouldn't be one to shy away from not doing the whole thing. You know, that's
Mm-hmm.
not my,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like an all in kind of girl. And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, probably one day. And, you know, I think that one thing I've learned coming out of healthcare with a CV this long with training, and I am a nerd and I love to learn, and it's got to be at this point really aligned and strategic for the right reasons and also the right timing. And
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to titrate it as I learn it and integrate it and all that kind of stuff. So it's usually a very intentional decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think necessarily everyone has to do the SE
Right.
training. It really is a very intensive training for people who plan on like working with trauma. There's definitely coaches who do the training. I've also heard some people will just do the first year of it because in the first year you basically learn all of the technique in the first year. And then the second year, you're learning about specific categories of
Mm.
trauma, like car accidents, what we call inescapable attack, natural disasters, even war trauma. So the second year, we're taking everything we learned about in the first year and applying it to like very specific types of trauma. And then in the third year, we work with more complex trauma, medical syndromes, and the very last module is all about touch. But I think there's a lot of value that can come from just doing the first year if you want to learn the fundamentals of somatic experiencing
I love
and
this.
get some practice practicing it at the training.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know. And there's a lot of coaches in the world who are in my audience who I'm sure are like me, are like, I'm really interested. I love that I'm at this point where I'm like, well, I know it's not trauma necessarily that I want to work with. It's just not my lane. And what is there out there for me that gives me some really good training, but doesn't, give me stuff that I don't necessarily need. Yeah.
Yeah, and there might be other more like coaching focused somatic trainings. I'm, not aware of all the trainings out there, but there might be other options too. But even the SE training, it only meets 3 times a year in that first year, so it would be like 3 long weekends.
Right.
And then there are extra requirements if you want to get the SEP certification, but if you don't want that or need that, you could just, attend those 3 weekends.
Cool. Good to know. One of
Yeah.
my clients did the whole training. That's what actually pointed me in the direction of it in the first place. I was like, what are you even talking about?
Mhm.
And then I realized I was even doing a lot of this stuff with her. Again, I just didn't know, I didn't have a name on it. Well, okay. Tell us about, speaking of being in your body, but not being in your body, or moving, but not being in your body.
Mhm.
You had a background in yoga, correct? And
Yes.
then now, and like, there's a story there that got you bridged into SC stuff. So walk us through what feels relevant, even based on what we've said from I was a yoga teacher and now I do this.
Yeah, and even before yoga, I was a dancer.
Right.
So I started dancing when I was like 4 years old, danced all the way through college. I was on the dance team in college. After college, I was looking to still be physically active. So I signed up for yoga classes. And my first job out of college sent me to Seattle. So I had like a corporate job with a bad commute, and I would, you know, sometimes be in traffic for 2 hours and then would come home, eat something, and like rush to yoga class. Sometimes I'd be that person who's like running in late, like setting up my mat right before class starts. And there was this period of time where that school was doing a yoga teacher training and one of the students was assisting the class. And I just remember looking at her sitting in the corner wearing these comfy clothes and looking so peaceful. And I just had this thought like, I want to be like that person. And I didn't even know what that meant. And looking back, it was like, oh, I probably wanted to feel more regulated and more
Fair.
embodied. But after I left that job, I decided to sign up for a yoga teacher training. So I've actually done two 200-hour yoga teacher trainings. I also did a training in restorative yoga, and I taught restorative yoga in Asheville. And so on paper, right, I had a regular embodiment practice. I was practicing yoga multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I even had started what I thought was a meditation practice, but I wasn't really meditating. I was just sitting on a pillow with like my eyes closed, just thinking. So part of my story too is that after I did the yoga teacher training, I lived in Italy for a few years with my ex-boyfriend for his job. And yeah, even while I was living in Italy, I tried to practice yoga every morning. One weird thing I started noticing in Italy was I actually didn't feel all that great if I practiced yoga at home by myself, just using like something on the computer, like doing a class from the computer. And I felt much better if I actually went to a class and was practicing in a room with other people. And so I always like to joke that I figured out polyvagal theory like my own way. I was like, having co-regulation with other humans makes me feel better.
Interesting.
But at the end of my time in Italy, I ended up having what I call nervous breakdown. I started having all these physical health symptoms. I went on a wild goose chase for about 5 years, trying all different kinds of things. And then it was finally 2019, I finally landed in the office of a somatic experiencing practitioner. Even prior to that, I had been working with someone who was a somatic therapist, and she actually did do a somatic training. She was certified in Hakomi, which is a type of somatic therapy, yet it isn't as focused in trauma physiology as somatic experiencing and sensory motor psychotherapy are. And so after working with this woman for 2 years, my body went into what I now know is called tonic immobility, but basically my entire body was scared stiff. I was like constantly feeling overwhelmed all the time, and I was overriding my body's signals to do what this therapist was suggesting I try. Like she was kind of pushing me to get out there and date, and I would go on the date and just be completely overwhelmed. And basically I hit this point where I developed pain in my left glute. And as a former ballerina, I used to be able to fold forward and practically touch my elbows to the ground. Well, at this point, I couldn't fold forward more than 20 degrees. And anytime I externally rotated my legs, I would get pain in my left glute, which is really unfortunate because at this point I was teaching like a vinyasa hatha yoga class. And then I ended up pulling my hamstring because my body's so tight and I'm still trying to show hamstring stretches. So I went to this therapist and I showed her what was happening, told her what was happening. And I thought we were going to work through it in this like somatic therapy I had been hearing about. But instead, she gave me a referral to go see a chiropractor. So I go to the chiropractor. The chiropractor's using one of those tables where like the pelvis drops down and they're like adjusting your pelvis. I got massages. The massage therapist did refer me to a physical therapist. And actually, that was really helpful. That physical therapist specialized in hypermobility, and she was the first person to point out, like, you are likely hypermobile, and actually, you don't need to practice yoga. Like, you don't need to stretch. You need to do strength training. So she gave me a lot of really helpful exercises to do. But in addition to that, she was dry needling my psoas, which would help the pain for a few days, but then it would come back. I also got acupuncture treatment where they were sticking these huge like Chinese needles in my hip and my glute. It was one of the most intense acupuncture treatments I've ever had. I had the most intense dreams that night. It took me like a day or two to recover after that treatment. Somewhere on this journey, I had an appointment with an integrative doctor. I told him, I'm just feeling overwhelmed all the time. I showed him like my mobility. And he looked me straight in the eyes and he was like, you are a highly empathic person. You know what people are feeling, and all your friends want to tell you their problems. And then he pushed his chair away from me and he was like, boundary. You need to learn when you're going to turn that on and when you're going to turn that off. You don't need to be walking around the grocery store taking in how everyone's feeling. I was like, well, that sounds great. How do I do that? And yeah. And he's like, you tell me, what would you do? And I think at that time I was like, I guess I would practice yoga and meditate. And that led us to having a discussion about embodiment. He suggested I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And after I read that book, that's kind of what empowered me to go to my current therapist and say, I think I need to work with someone who specializes in trauma. And she was like, oh, yeah, I don't specialize in trauma, which at the time I was like, why didn't you tell me that 2 years ago? But I've now just realized that it's kind of part of the process of finding a
Yeah.
therapist who's a good fit. You know, it takes time and the landscape can be kind of confusing.
And sometimes would you say, I don't know if this applied to you, but it did in some parts of my story in going through various iterations of therapy or coaching or healing work on the heart emotional level is sometimes it's like you have to get through a layer of coping strategies, so to speak, like to then even realize there's trauma in there. And now a very skilled trauma therapist is going to be able to cut right through it real fast, but, or maybe not fast, but skillfully, kindly.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not wrong, to start on, you're doing all this body work and all these things. And it's like you kind of have to, your body has to almost like wake up to its own truth, so to speak.
Yeah, I would definitely, I don't know if that was my situation, but I definitely could see that being true for some people that, yeah, sometimes it just takes time. And sometimes you have to try things that don't feel good before you know what does feel good. And it's definitely a process, this unraveling little bit by little bit.
Yeah. You got to kiss some frogs sometimes before you figure out where the handsome prince is. I love
Yeah,
what you
not that that
said.
experience was all bad. Like
Yeah.
there was definitely things I took away from that experience. It just became clear at that point, like my body also needs something else.
I love what you said, coming back to boundaries. Okay, this is so funny. I can hear, I don't even know who this was, but I can just hear it. I can feel it. And you're like, cool, sign me up. How do we do this? Okay. So jumping a little bit ahead, like especially you even mentioned like highly sensitive people, intuitive people are going to read the cues, like I was saying, in people. And that's both a gift and it's a double-edged sword, right? So talk to me about personally your experience with recognizing that was you and recognizing the need for boundaries, healthy aggression, selectivity, honoring your energy in that way.
Yeah, I'm just tuning into where to start. It's definitely been a process that like continues to evolve. But working with my first somatic experiencing practitioner was definitely helpful and eye-opening when it came to boundaries. I had shared with you via email that I did a lot of boundary work with this somatic practitioner. One of the first exercises we did together was something she would call the yarn exercise. I think I came in actually to that session. I told her what happened with the doctor, and she was just like, oh, you want to play a game? I was like, okay. And so she gives me this piece of yarn and she has me make like a circle around myself with the yarn, and I get to decide how big it is and what shape it is. And then I also got to tell her where I wanted her in the room, like how far away from me I wanted her to be. And actually, her room wasn't that big, so I probably would have wanted her even further, but we made it work. And then she had me look down at this yarn boundary around me and track, what are you noticing in your system as you look at your space? And she would even have me maybe say, like, this is my space. Even like, this is my space. No one's allowed in without my permission. And I would take some time with that. And I noticed when I wasn't looking at her and I was just orienting to, this is my space, I could feel in my body my respiratory diaphragm settling down. And then after we spent some time with that, she had me now look up at her and notice what happens in my body now that I'm interacting with someone else. And as soon as I looked up at her, I could feel that respiratory diaphragm coming in and up, like all of my energy kind of coming upwards. And then she just had me at my own pace move back and forth between those two places, getting to look down. This is my space. And then get to look up at her. And we just kind of noticed what my body was doing. And I don't think I was probably that embodied at the time, so I don't really remember what happened next. But at the end of the session, she did encourage me, when you're going around in the world, you can imagine you have this yarn around yourself and just see how that is. And I did notice my reaction to other people really shifted after that session. Like before that session, I was very hyper vigilant, particularly at the gym. If I was at the gym, even if my body was moving, I was not really in my body. I would be tracking everything that's happening around me in the room. I would know where every man was, what man was checking me out. If there was a woman who seemed annoyed, I would notice that. If people were on their cell phone, it would drive me nuts. But I was like very aware of what was happening around me and not so much aware of my body doing the exercises. And I noticed after that session, when I went to the gym, and it might not have been right away, but as we continued working together, I noticed I'd be at the gym just doing my own thing, and I was not as impacted by what was happening around me. Not that I didn't notice at all, but it didn't have the same charge to it, and it didn't feel like there was a threat if somebody looked at me.
Well, you'd also really experienced your space and the, like, for lack of a better phrase, safety that you felt there, and like being attuned to that. I love that you guys did that like pendulating thing where it's like, there's our sine wave again, right? And like it gave you the experience of, oh, I can come here and be safe here and function here. That's really interesting. I think about 2 episodes ago, I was talking with my friend, colleague Megan, about how life is the both and, which I think is what we were saying. Like you're going to have moments of like activation or mobilization or devastation, like whatever. And we're going to have moments of joy and peace and calm and ease and whatever. And it's not about one or the other. It's about the ability to have a healthy cycle between the two, or even be almost able to hold both at the same time. And I love that you found that from that one exercise. It obviously wasn't that one time, right? It's like it grew into more of an experience and awareness.
Yeah, and I've even been reflecting on this recently, that as a sensitive person, I used to be someone, in order to feel safe, would like isolate. And I have kind of come to this realization that it's like this dance, like you're saying, this both end of like, I am going to have times where I want to be alone. I'm going to have times where I want to be with people. And it doesn't have to be one or the other, but being able to like dance between these two and really feel into my body moment by moment to know like, what's my system needing in this moment? Is it needing time alone, or is it needing time with people? And that might even change depending on who the people are. Like, how close do I want to be to that person? Maybe this person I really want to be close to. That other person, they're okay across the room.
Okay. So the concept of like selectivity and boundaries and choosing people, for example, that's really interesting. I think as someone who's highly sensitive as well, for me, the lesson I've learned is, not everyone's going to be your bestie, or even like you don't want to reject them because you know how it feels, and like everyone needs to be included. And that's gotten me in some interesting places. And I think that even coming back to our conversation about the environment, how your body feels in certain environments, safety wise, all of that, systems, a really important thing I learned was really hearing my body saying something's not okay here with me,
Yeah.
as not necessarily a personal affront on someone or me, because what I learned from the mentor who said everything is your responsibility and blah, 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 and it's never anyone else, was I learned, oh, there must be something wrong with me, that I'm feeling uncomfortable or tense or wanting distance from this person who I genuinely like. But I like this part around selectivity that's sort of like, no, we can be tight, but from a distance. Or like you can be an Instagram friend and that's enough. Or we're going to be coffee date buddies. That feels right to me. And noting the effect of those external loci of control, plural. How do we say it? What, that works.
That works.
But noting, just giving some power to the fact that external people, environment, systems have an effect on you.
Yeah, Asia Suler, who's another highly sensitive person online who I really love, she has a book called, I think it's called Mirrors of the Earth, but she has a great boundary exercise in there where she has you write down the top 10 people in your life, like in your inner circle, and then bring each one of them into mind and notice how you feel in your body as you do that. And then you create a picture where you put yourself in the middle and then figure out where do you want each person on that picture? How close are you? Are they next to you? Are they behind you? Are they in front of you? And kind of play around with actually how close you want those people to be to you and also to each other. But it's a cool somatic way to explore those uh, relationship dependent boundaries.
Yeah. Ooh, it's like the yarn exercise, but with 10 people
Yeah, exactly.
all
Exactly.
at once. Love that.
Yeah.
That seems like a really powerful
Um,
exercise.
Yeah, but I did have a couple other books I might throw out there and
Yeah.
also want to chat a little bit more about boundaries and sensitive people. So one book that was really helpful for me was by Anita Morjani. It's called Sensitive is the New Strong. Yeah. And in it, she talks all about how sensitive people are really great at attuning to the people around them and actually how they might not have a strong sense of self. And when that happens, we can end up being a doormat for other people. And she also writes a lot about how some traditional spiritual advice is really great for other people, but not necessarily great for sensitive people because, people who are more lacking in empathy might need to hear from spiritual teachers, have compassion for your neighbor. You should be kind to your neighbor. You should think about how your actions impact other people. You should dissolve your ego. Highly sensitive people do not need that advice. We already have like low ego. We're already so giving to other people. We're already hyper attuned to other people's needs. And so the advice Anita gives is like highly sensitive people actually need to turn their ego dial up so that we can have a sense of self. And then from that place, we can have healthier relationships with people because you can't have a healthy relationship where you're just merging with the other person. You need two distinct, separate beings that then join in order to have a healthy relationship. And if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a strong sense of self, there's no you to be part of that relationship.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of on the contrary, if you are doing all the work and all of the, all right, I'm going to work on me and, be as compassionate. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but different side of the coin. Be as compassionate as possible. And like this person who I see why they treat me the way they do. I get it. It makes sense. It's like you've also, maybe that is you, that you are that compassionate, but you still kind of lose yourself to
And what
them.
you're losing in there is compassion for yourself. So there's
Exactly.
that like loving kindness prayer, like may all beings be happy, peaceful, live with ease. Sensitive people are really great at sending that energy out into the world and they completely forget to include themselves of like, oh, let me also have compassion for my experience and my
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah. Boundaries, with my clients, a lot of them are very good at like time boundaries. I'm going to make sure there's time for me every day. Got that practice in, which I love. The one that I find, so most of the people who come to me are grappling with a pretty deep question about themselves or about life. Speaking of sense of self, or really three deep questions, which are who am I? What is my purpose? And who are my people? And it all centers around the 35 to 55 period of life in terms of ages, where you've established a career, you've established a reputation, you've figured out you probably have a family. There might be kids, there might not be kids. And there's a lot of check boxing. There's a lot of I've done the thing, I've done the thing, I've done the thing I should be doing, a lot of that. And what's really, really interesting is I've coined this term called the conformity corset that they find that they're in. Sort of like I've lived life, I've done well. I actually genuinely like my life. But there's this voice in me that's saying, this is not it.
Mhm.
It's not who I am. It's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's not necessarily who I'm supposed to be in relationship with, whether it's marriage, friendship, family, whatever it is, friends. What it looks like in this case, a lot of times, is they're too boundaried in, like, there's this like squeezing in of their sense of self. It's locked in there in that corset, and they actually need to bust out. And what that can look like a lot of times that we end up dipping into is aggression
Mm.
or anger
Hmm.
or rage,
Yeah.
the feral side
Hmm.
of what might be behind boundaries. Because then boundaries are set, relationships may be rejiggered, the yarn is moved for people. So I wonder about, with people, and most of my people are highly sensitive too, with people who are highly sensitive, in your experience, either your own or with clients, what does helping them get acquainted with aggression or anger or rage look like, feel like? What's that like?
I'm so glad you brought up this topic because I was really excited to talk about it today. It's one of my favorite topics, especially
Same.
helping highly sensitive people to like reclaim this healthy aggression. And there's a couple different contexts in which I'm having to talk about it with people. The first is like healthy aggression in real life, like when you're actually out in the world. And the second is expressing healthy aggression in the therapy room, where what we're expressing isn't actually going to impact other
Mm-hmm.
people. So in the real life, the way I describe healthy aggression is, again, responding to the moment and protecting your boundaries, protecting your life force energy in a way that's appropriate to what's happening. And so if you go to a restaurant, you order a meal and they bring you the wrong dish, it is healthy aggression to say, "This isn't what I ordered. Can you please bring me what I ordered?" But on the flip side, if you are being attacked, you're not going to respond the same way you would to the waiter. In that situation, it is perfectly appropriate to kick, to scream, to punch, to do whatever you need to do to protect your life force energy. And a lot of sensitive people don't want to express any aggression at all because there's so many examples of unhealthy aggression in our world, and they don't want to perpetuate that. Most unhealthy aggression often comes from unresolved trauma. So people who have an unresolved trauma from the past, and now they're projecting it onto a current situation. And highly sensitive people, they don't want to perpetuate that harm. So they're like, "I'm just not going to express any aggression at all." And then this leads me to talking about the fight response in the therapy room, which is ultimately how we heal the past trauma so that you're not projecting that past trauma onto current situations in your life. And so in the therapy room, there's plenty of times where I'm helping people to track their sensations, and they'll notice some fists are coming, or their jaws clenching. And when I bring awareness to it and ask, like, is there an impulse that wants to happen, a lot of times they'll shut down that impulse because they're like, "Well, I don't want to be violent."
Yeah.
And so in that situation, I'm explaining to them there's a difference between feeling an impulse and acting it out in real life. And in this room, we are just feeling the impulse. We are not actually harming anyone. We're not actually punching anyone. And I'll also talk about this disconnect between the personality and the organism. So it's like right now your organism is having this sympathetic energy, like wants to protect your life force energy. And then your personality is coming in and shutting that down, saying like, "No, I should really be able to put myself in this person's shoes and have compassion for them." And that can create, you know, incoherence in the body when there's
Mm-hmm.
this disconnect between the personality and the organism. So I'm like, this is a safe place for your organism to do whatever it wants to express. And it doesn't need to be pretty. It doesn't need to be nice. And we're not actually harming anyone. And usually after I get this speech, people are pretty ready to be like, "Yeah, let me see what this is like." But there's a few ways I do it with people. One is around making fists. Sometimes I'll have people make fists for like 3 seconds, release it for 3 seconds, and then rest for 3 seconds. And that helps them to feel healthy aggression in a very titrated way that hopefully won't be overwhelming. Another one I do a lot is called push hands, where if we're in the same room with each other, we'll stand up, we'll touch hands, and I will have them push me. I will give them a little bit of resistance, but I ultimately let them win. which gives their body the experience of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I can. And like I was talking about at the beginning of our interview, I can complete this threat response
Mm-hmm.
cycle. I can fight if I have to. And the beautiful thing, once people do that a couple times, sometimes it takes a couple times for them to like really believe it. After they complete that fight response, usually there's some down regulation in the system, like their system can settle. And there'll also be this sense of strength that emerges from within, but they feel strong and relaxed at the same time. And it's this embodied feeling of, I could fight if I had to. And the cool thing about that is sometimes you don't even need to use the fight response to get the benefits, but just because your nervous system knows I can if I have to, you can walk around the world feeling a little bit safer because you're not like constantly bracing for, someone to violate your boundaries. It's like, you're almost projecting this like, don't mess with me. And actually people who harm others are really good at reading who can I pick on, who has an incomplete fight response and who has one. So when you kind of reclaim this healthy aggression, you help to exit this cycle of having other people harm you.
Someone recently told me, and we were talking about that actually, about the suppressed fight response and how that inherently makes you feel less safe because you don't have, unconsciously, you don't have the resource available
Mm-hmm.
of defending yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's there, it's not online. It's like offline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love this image of them pushing you just enough that their body clocks the I can. And suddenly, I loved what you said about feeling both strong and relaxed at the same time. What a beautiful paradox. It's like the best paradox.
It's my favorite part of my job. When I get to witness people experiencing that, it lights me up.
Yeah. Having done a lot of that, that was probably the keystone for me in recovery from the traumatic relationship situation. Now, I wasn't mending that relationship, so it was kind of one-sided in a way. Like, it was for me to let my systems complete, honestly. And now the work is bringing the healthy aggression into relationships I plan to keep. And that's harder. Like you said, it needs to be done in a like therapeutic relationship, because I can push into the wall all day and let that response complete, and it is exactly that. I feel both strong and relaxed at the end of it
Mm-hmm.
when I'm picturing this person in my mind. Like, there is such a beautiful technique to that, but bringing it into like the IRL, in real life, into interactions, and not necessarily in a physically aggressive way, but like having a voice that says,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
All of that has to happen with someone. And I'm so glad that you play that role for people.
Yeah, and I do like to reframe setting boundaries with people you care about. Sometimes rather than like you're setting this like boundary of like, I'm giving you feedback about our relationship because I care about our relationship and I want
Yes.
it to continue. And if I didn't care about our relationship, I might not be saying this to you. I just wouldn't be giving you the time of day. And so to reframe that of like, the kindest thing to do is to be honest with the people that you want to be close to.
Yeah. Coming back to that, selectivity, right? It's like, I think you might have described this as a cat, right? Like, the cat will get close sometimes, but it also is very selective. I love that personality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not personal. It's not mean. It's not necessarily, it's healthy aggression in a way, right? But it's not aggression in the negative way, as you said, those of us who are very sensitive, we want to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, the other thing about animals is they don't harm other animals if they don't have to. They will give a warning first. So cats
Mm.
are really great about that. Like before they swipe you, they will hiss,
Mm-hmm.
they just give you this little warning.
Yeah. Snakes, same thing.
Mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm.
passed a rattlesnake on a bike ride last week, and I have a very large snake phobia. And like, my husband stopped and pulled over and was like, be careful. But it wasn't rattling. And I remember being like, it's so cool that they have a warning response, and I feel so much better that I can pass without totally getting activated myself. I'm like, he didn't warn me. We're good.
Mhm,
I'm not
mhm.
too much in his space. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love this topic. Even as we're sitting here, like my brain is like thinking about all the other boundary things. They come and go so quickly. I can't always.
You have me wondering what my warning response is now. I'm like, ooh, what's my hiss? Maybe I need to hiss some more. Like, literally.
Kids will do that when they play with
Exactly.
each other. And I'm like, I love that. That's great.
My dogs do it. I'm just thinking, yeah, like the dogs will be playing and sparring, and, one of them will be like, which we recognize it immediately when we're watching them. We're like, oh, that's the back off,
Yeah.
and then if they don't back off, then the next thing is a yelp.
Hmm,
Ouch,
hmm,
screaming.
hmm, hmm.
Stopping too. I never thought that if you asked me 10 years ago if I'd be sitting here having a conversation about aggression, what I would say was, "Oh, I don't experience aggression. That's not a good thing."
Hmm, 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 hmm.
Fun times.
Yeah, same as me. If I 10 years ago was like, I'm going to be teaching people about embodiment, I would not have believed it because I lived the first 30 years of my life basically from my neck up.
Didn't you major in engineering?
I did major in engineering, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Although I like to joke that I studied biomedical engineering. I like to joke that I'm still doing biomedical
You
engineering
are.
just through somatics and not through like prosthetics or drugs.
Yeah, you are. You are. I say the same thing. Like physical therapy, people call us like mechanics of the body, like the car mechanic. And I'm like, I'm still kind of doing that though. Now it's more what are people's souls telling them to become? But we're listening through the body and like really, you know, hearing those cues in a very different way, reprogramming in a very different way, but it's still very similar. Because when you change on the soul level, the body responds differently. Suddenly you have more strength than you had before. Suddenly, muscles that were tight relax, or vice versa. Muscles that were shut down wake up. So, fun times. Okay. So we both talk about how our lives have changed dramatically in many ways. Yeah, maybe we were always on this track, which I love. So recently you moved, you were in my part of the woods, and now you're back in Durham.
Mhm.
Love Durham so much, so, so much. And you are establishing and reestablishing community and have done a lot of really beautiful work to ground into yourself. Speaking of that sense of self, you can just tell, like, even through Instagram, like, it's so beautiful to witness. So, what have you learned about yourself in this process? What have you learned about building community?
Mm.
Um, now that you're, not in your early 30s,
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually turned 40 this year, which has been a milestone for
right?
me. And I think they say once you hit 40, you are really able to march to the beat of your own drum a little bit more and don't care so much about, what social group am I a part of and what do people think about me, which I feel like is totally true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, figuring out I was a highly sensitive person was a big aha moment on my journey because up until then, I really was comparing myself a lot to non-sensitive people and feeling like I should keep up with them or feeling like, oh, I should go to parties because that's what people do. And so even having the label highly sensitive person has been super helpful because it's just helped me to validate what I already knew was my truth. And it just gives me a little extra permission. So compared to probably most modern people, I live a pretty slow pace life. I'm not in completely living in the rhythms with nature, but I try to integrate that into my lifestyle as much as I can. Sometimes I forget how far away I am from the mainstream culture until I'm like, oh yeah, I get to work from home and I haven't been in my car in 2 weeks. It is. But yeah, finding community has been a longing and a challenge for me over the last 10 years since I got back from Italy. Being in Italy was great, but parts of it were also isolating, living in a country where I didn't speak the language. And so when I got back, I was really craving consistent community. And I've moved around a lot since I got back. I met a lot of great friends, but was still craving this sense of like belonging in community. And one of my struggles for a period of time was I felt like whenever I'd be looking for events to go to, there was so much community that was monetized, like, oh, just pay a few $100s to go to this yoga retreat or this 11-week, coaching course. And these are all great offerings, but like when that's all you have and there's not community that's not monetized, I really felt a longing for something that wasn't commodified. And when I sat with it, really what I was looking for was a sense of belonging. And I think also a sense of secure attachment where you're in community over years with people. And when you just go to like a one-time paid event, sure, there's going to be people there, but you might not have connection with them after that event. You don't know who's going to be there. It could be a random mix of people. And you don't get that same feeling of belonging, I feel like, when there is money exchanged. And a piece of it too, when I lived in Asheville, I had a lot of creative friends who were trying to make a living in all these creative ways. But there was this period of time where I felt like my friends were only texting me when they were inviting me to an event that you paid for. Like, oh, I'm doing a song circle, I'm teaching poetry class, or like authentic relating games, but it's always this event that you paid for. There was often not a lot of quality control over who's going to be there when you're just trying to make money. There was certain men in Asheville I'd prefer not to be in the same room with. And it's like, I know if I go to this public event, they're going to be there. And I just would prefer not to be in the same room with them. So it's been a struggle for me. Now being back in Durham, I would say I mostly hang out with people one-on-one. I do a lot of walks with friends. I do a lot of tea dates. So I do a lot of things one-on-one. And as a highly sensitive person, that's kind of how I prefer to connect. But then I was sharing with you before this call, I also recently started a women's circle with a few friends who are also highly sensitive. And that's really been feeding my soul as well. And I think what's cool is I knew two of the women before we started it, and they each invited friends. And we have a monthly circle where we get together, but we also are starting to connect outside of that as well. So that's been feeling really nourishing. But honestly, I'm still in a process of figuring it out, and it's really not easy in the world that we live in.
Not. I just had a conversation about this with my coach this morning, and I'm with you. I think that I feel so much resonance with what you're saying about wanting that belonging in an ongoing way with people. And I too reached a point in the last several years where I think COVID didn't help many of us because everything became online. Also, that's its own thread of it. But I feel like I reached this point where I was like, I'm just kind of done with the pay to play situation when it comes to friendship. And I think at 40, like you said, we're kind of marching to the beat of our own drums, which is a healthy thing. And that's what I help people do. Like you said, I'm like, I help them go from you need to march to this beat to yours. But when you get there, you're also looking around and going, wait, who are my people? And wait, those aren't my people anymore. There's grief involved and there's identity work and there's like, all my people are work friends, but I don't want to do that work anymore or whatever. And I think that there's this real hardship that comes when, for much of our lives, our friendships were default friendships. You know, we were in the same sorority, like sort of you're based on, what's the word I'm looking for? Proximity, location, geography, and or purpose-based. We work together, or we do yoga together, whatever it is. And I think that there's actually some, it's not necessarily monetized, but commodifying. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Even around work, right? Like networking, where there's this sort of like, that's what I was talking about with someone this morning. I was like, there's this sort of like unconscious getting from each other, which is just weird because that's not actually how women bond, you know? So I think at this point, I've definitely gotten to this place where I'm like, I just want the women's circle. Or like I've started a book club, or, Swifties. I'm a big Swiftie. I'm
Yeah.
hoping to throw a Taylor Swift album release party where it's just like, yeah, there's this thing that we're gathering around, but it's just for the sake of gathering,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
or going on a walk with someone, or getting tea, not because, we might talk about our work, but really more special, just like to be with each other for the sake of co-regulation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ongoing, like, secure attachment, not just with your partner, but with community and friends.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think our online crazed world also, not just COVID, but I think the very fast transactional world has maybe gotten us away from that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely not easy. And I think we have to get creative and like try stuff out and see what feels good, which is where the embodiment work comes in helpful because you're like, okay, I just tried a thing. How does that feel? Do I want to do that again? And I do think sometimes you're going to experience some failure. So don't be hard on yourself if every experiment you try doesn't work. It's like you have to sometimes try things and be like, oh, that didn't feel like a good fit, but this thing felt a little bit better. But I do think we really have to start getting creative in this 2025 about how we are finding community. And as someone who studies the nervous system, it's super important for
Yeah.
our nervous system. Our biology is not designed to be alone in an apartment watching Netflix by yourself. Like, we need other human bodies around us.
Yeah. Amen to that. Speaking of being in community, let's imagine younger Audrey, younger
Mhm.
Julie, from 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even. If you could tap on their shoulders and whisper a little something in their ear, I'll think of something too, but I'll let you go first. Just a little piece of advice, even if you know they won't listen, but maybe they will. What would you say?
I think I would give her a little heads up of like, you're a highly sensitive person.
Yeah.
I would also just tell her that I love her. And because I'm now a touch practitioner, I'd give her lots of touch, a big hug, cuddle her.
Oh, I can feel that warm.
Yeah.
I think that I would tell younger me, you're right. You're always right. Like, the deeper you, and really your body's always right. And it's not necessarily something you've done wrong or failed at or a disease to fix. Sometimes it is. But, like, your body is so wise, and that little voice inside of
Mm,
you that's telling
mm.
you this might be something is correct.
That is so super important. And I wish we spent more time. Maybe they are now, but at least when we grew up, I wish they spent more time teaching people to trust their inner wisdom. Yeah.
The friend I just interviewed right before you, her name's Kate. She has an 11-year-old, and she was talking about how he is a 55-year-old in the body of an 11-year-old, and he is the exception, not the norm for kids, but he has that.
Hmm, hmm.
They've taught him some, but he's also just very embodied and very aware and emotionally intelligent and great with boundaries, right? I know. Now, if
That's
every kid could
awesome.
be that way, that'd be amazing. Well, Audrey, thank you for being here. Tell us how to get in touch with you. What's the best way to find out about your work? All that good stuff.
I think the easiest way is my website, which is restorativepresence.com. It's kind of a play on restorative yoga, but it's
Love that.
restorative presence. I'm also on Instagram at Somatics with Audrey. Haven't been sharing a lot on Instagram or my newsletter, but when I do start sharing, that's where I'll share Instagram. And then also on my website, you can sign up for the newsletter if you want.
Perfect. Okay, I'll put all
Yeah.
that in the show notes. So anyone who's listening, definitely go follow, subscribe, cheer her on, all the things. Thank you for being here. We'll have to dig into all of the things I said. Oh, that's a rabbit hole. Some other time. That would be so fun.
Yes. It was so great to reconnect. Thanks so much for having
You
me.
too.